I remember the night with perfect, cruel clarity, the way the street lamp flickered through the stained glass window, the way my heart pounded against my ribs like a frantic prisoner. I stood on that balcony in my threadbare robe, the damp night air prickling my skin, clutching his phone in one hand and the crumpled eviction notice in the other. He was down there on the sidewalk, his shoulders slumped beneath the fluorescent glare of the 24-hour casino sign, arguing into the receiver with someone whose voice I couldn't quite catch. My blood ran cold when he pressed the phone against his ear, looked up, and for a fraction of a second met my gaze. But it wasn't me he saw. It was the promise of another bet, another roll of the dice. In that instant, I understood that he had already gambled away more than just our money. Then the balcony door slammed behind me, his voice raised, the bookie's laughter crackling through the speaker, and I felt the last of my illusions shatter. I didn't stay for his excuses. For once, I didn't want to hear the lies. It started years earlier, in a classroom that smelled of chalk dust and hope. I was 22, fresh from state college, on a teacher training scholarship, determined to prove that a girl from the forgotten side of town could build a future beyond the trailer parks of her childhood. My mother had scrubbed toilets and folded laundry in a laundromat, just so I could have textbooks. So I owed it to her and to myself to become someone. When I met him at that back-to-school night, he was leaning against the wall outside room 107, the whiteboard behind him scribbled with, "Welcome, ninth graders." He wore a crisp button-down and a grin that suggested confidence rather than arrogance. I thought he was a substitute teacher at first. I didn't know then that he prided himself on reinvention. His name was Daniel. We talked about poetry and jazz and the ways the world does best by people who are willing to scrape and claw and stay up all night. I felt electric, as though he'd sparked something under my skin. 2 weeks later, over lukewarm coffee in the teacher's lounge, he asked if he could drive me home. I live nearby. And I said yes. What I didn't know at the time was that nearby meant the broken-down duplex on the outskirts of town, where the walls were thin and the windows rattled in the wind. I discovered that later, when I woke up at 2 a.m. to the clink of quarters dropping into slot machines, a neon ghost dancing across his face through the thin curtains. In the beginning, it was sweet. He sent me flowers on my birthday. He listened when I complained about grading essays until my eyes bled red. He told me I deserved the world. And I believed him. I sacrificed quietly like a prayer. I postponed my master's program because of funding issues. He convinced me that the first year of teaching was better tackled alone, that I should wait until I was settled. I shelved my dreams of traveling to see the places I had read about in Dickens and Baldwin for the promise of stability. I lent him money to cover rent when he said his paycheck was delayed. I rewrote my budget, skipping the soft things, a new winter coat, the pottery classes I'd always wanted to make sure he could keep his head above water. Behind my back, he was placing bets. At first, they were small, an online poker game after midnight, a wager on a basketball game he just knew he could win. He'd come home with that same confident grin, promising he'd pay me back next week, next payday, next month. And I believed him each time because I wanted to believe in the man I loved. My colleagues called me the rock, the reliable one who stayed late to help kids who'd given up. They didn't see the cracks forming in me, the way my dreams curdled into guilt each time I fed him another $100 bill. The first time I confronted him, I was late returning from a parent-teacher conference. I'd missed my bus and walked home in the drizzle, only to find the door ajar. His laptop lay open on the coffee table, tabs flashing odds on the national poker tourney. My throat closed up. When he came in, his trousers stained with grease and his tie slung over his shoulder, he looked startled. I'm trying a new strategy," he stammered. "Promotional bonus." I wanted to ask why he'd lied about working late, why his paychecks never arrived on time anymore. Why he smelled like whiskey even when he claimed he was off the sauce. Instead, I turned and walked out because I didn't a shame in his eyes mixed with that same smugness. A month before the balcony night, the eviction notice arrived. We'd fallen 2 months behind, my student loans and his gambling debt colliding in that yellow envelope. And that's when I discovered the second betrayal, the lie that hurt worse than any affair could. He hadn't been using my money to pay bills. He'd been collateral for the bookie. There was a letter official looking buried under a pile of student essays. It said if he didn't pay within 7 days, they'd come for me, for my car, for anything of value. I nearly passed out right there, crumpling the letter in my hands, the lacquered stage smile of the freshman class president flashing across my mind. That night, I sat at the edge of our sagging couch and cried until my head ached. I felt betrayed in every possible way. His dishonesty, his risk-taking, his willingness to drag me down with him. I felt small, exposed, ashamed that I'd trusted him so completely. At my lowest, I considered turning back to the world I thought I'd left behind. I thought about moving back in with my mother 5 people in a 2-bedroom trailer, where I'd been the oldest daughter who watched her siblings so mom could work another shift. I thought about giving up teaching, giving up the idea that I was made for something bigger than survival. But even as I stared at the notice, phone slipped between my fingers and the couch creaking beneath me, I felt a spark small, almost invisible, a stubborn warmth in the pit of my stomach. A memory of my mother rising at 5 a.m. to fold sheets in that laundromat, bruised hands still searching for hope. So I did something I never thought I could. I called an old mentor, the superintendent who'd first believed in me. I swallowed my pride and admitted the truth, that I was drowning, that the man I loved was gambling away our future, that I needed help. She answered on the first ring. "You're a good teacher," she said, her voice soft. "And if you're not okay, how long before your students stop okaying with your half-lived self?" A week later, I signed a lease on a studio apartment 4 blocks from the school, the one that cost me my latte fund and half my grocery budget. But it was mine. I loaned a friend my car for a month in exchange for safe parking near campus. I applied for a hardship grant to cover my student loans. Through it all, he pleaded. He promised to get clean, to pay back every dollar, to go to therapy, whatever I wanted. I let him show up at my door once, with a bouquet of wilted tulips and eyes so wide they begged forgiveness. I let him talk until he cried. Then I closed the door and walked away. When I look back, I realize that moment him standing on my doorstep, broken and desperate, was when I first tasted real freedom. Not the kind that comes from having money in the bank, but the kind that comes from shutting a door on someone who has taught you how to lock yourself in a prison of love and lies. Tonight, as I stand on my own balcony, this time overlooking a city that never sleeps, instead of a neon casino, I'm about to do something he'll never see coming. I've learned that revenge isn't about cruelty. It's about reclaiming your power. I hear the muffled laughter of people who have no idea how close I came to losing everything. I feel the rough phone in my hand, loaded with evidence. Bank statements, voice messages, photos of him at the bookies, transcripts of threats. I'm tempted to call his new partner, because she deserves to know the truth, doesn't she? But that's too easy. That would be petty. No, I have something better in mind. I lift my gaze to the skyline, lights shimmering like promises waiting to be broken, and exhale. Tomorrow, I'll set my plan in motion. For now, I'll let him wonder why I disappeared. Let him taste the silence I once tried so hard to fill. I close my eyes and smile, fragile and fierce all at once, and step back inside, leaving the phone and him behind. I woke before the sun, the air heavy with promise. The phone lay on my desk, its screen cracked from last night's slam, but its memory was intact. I brewed strong black coffee, hands trembling, and scrolled through every file, bank statements showing transfers to offshore gambling accounts, voicemail recordings of his brash bets, the photographs of him slipping through the bookie's back door. Then there were the messages between him and his friend, a colleague at school full of late-night longing. I'd suspected infidelity, but seeing it in ink, reading his excuses to her that mirrored the lies he'd told me, it was poison and fuel all at once. I drafted my first email to his new partner, Sarah, whose name I'd uncovered on those messages. I quoted a line he'd sent her at 2 a. I can't get enough of you. I attached the screenshot. I wrote without mercy, you deserve to know who you fell for, that I sent it. Next, I composed a letter to the school board, carefully laying out evidence of his gambling debts, how he'd de-dipped into classroom funds to cover his losses, how he'd coerced me into fronting him money earmarked for student supplies. I described how he'd manipulated budgets, stolen from the kids he claimed to love. I signed it with my full name. By mid-morning, the ripple effects began. Sarah replied in shock, forwarding everything to his mother. The principal called for an emergency meeting. Within 24 hours, he was on administrative leave, under investigation for embezzlement and unprofessional conduct. His phone calls to me went straight to voicemail. I watched from my new apartment 4 walls I'd painted myself, each a shade of hope while his world collapsed. I felt sick for a moment. Revenge had a bitter aftertaste. But then I remembered the nights I spent up, wondering where my next paycheck would come from, the dreams I'd shelved so he could chase his next high. No remorse. With his absence, a strange calm settled over my life. Teaching had been my identity until it became a cage. Now, free from his shadow, I realized I'd lost sight of who I'd been before him, an eager girl from a trailer park with a scholarship and a reverence for words. I set a new goal that very week, to build an educational consultancy helping struggling students prepare for college. I called it Rising Tides Tutoring. I started small, flyers in coffee shops, a Facebook page I updated at midnight after grading essays. I tapped into every contact I'd made, the superintendent who'd believed in me, the mentor who'd taught me grant writing and asked for advice. I applied for a microloan to cover my first round of marketing materials. When my application was approved, I wept at my kitchen table, realizing I was investing in myself for the first time. My first client was a boy repeating 9th grade, terrified of algebra. I spent evenings at his kitchen table, drawing triangles with chalk on poster board, coaxing him out of his shell. When he passed his exam, his mother sent me a text. You changed his life. That message sat on my phone like polished stone. I carried it everywhere, reading it when doubt crept in. Word spread. By year's end, I had 5 tutors on contract, each specializing in subjects I'd once taught. We held weekend workshops in church basements, library meeting rooms, even empty classrooms after hours. I negotiated partnerships with local nonprofits to subsidize fees for low-income families. I was finally living the purpose I'd traded away in pursuit of stability. All the while, my heart was healing. I started therapy, something I'd always considered a luxury, and learned to name emotions I'd buried under guilt, anger, betrayal, grief. I journaled every morning, sometimes messy pages of tears, sometimes wild hopes. I got back into pottery classes, hands coated in clay as I shaped something beautiful out of nothing. I traveled 2 weekend trips to the coast, breathing in salt air, reminding myself that the world was bigger than my wounds. One afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at the State Teachers Association conference, Overcoming Personal Crisis to Transform Education. They called it. I hesitated. Public speaking still made my throat lock up. But I remembered the girl from room 107, eyes bright with possibility. I accepted. Standing behind that lectern, I told my story, the sacrifices I've made, the way I'd nearly let love become my undoing, How reclaiming my voice meant owning my failures as much as my successes. There wasn't a dry eye in the hall. Afterwards, educators lined up to thank me for being honest, for showing them that real teaching required resilience as much as lesson plans. When I returned to my apartment that night, I unlocked the door and found a package on my doorstep. A copy of the letterhead I de-ordered months ago, embossed in navy blue, reading Rising Tides Tutoring and Educational Services. I ran my fingers over the raised letters, feeling their solidity, their promise. And then came the sweetest piece of revenge. I learned that his gambling debts had spiraled so far that the bookie took legal action against him. His bank accounts were frozen, he lost his car, he had to move back in with his mother. I didn't gloat, I simply let the truth I'd laid bare do its work. A year after that balcony night, he called. His number was unlisted, and when my tutor phone rang, I stared at the screen. I let it go to voicemail. His message was broken. I'm sorry. Can we talk? I'll pay you back. I'll do anything. I listened once, then deleted. He taught for a while at a community college across town, under a different name. I heard through mutual colleagues that he spoke in dull tones, eyes haunted, like a man who'd learned too late that confidence without integrity is an empty shell. I felt no pity. I felt free. Today, I sit in my bright office plants on the windowsill, student artwork on the walls, and I breathe easily. My consultancy employs 12 tutors. We serve over 100 students. I have savings, health insurance, a passport full of stamps. I laugh again hard and often. I love again too, but with vigilance, looking for kindness before miracles, for consistency before romance. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found those late-night messages. If I'd stayed in that creaking duplex, patching up his debts with my own dreams. I shudder at the thought. I open my journal and write, "You are not your past. You are the force that overcame it." And when doubt creeps in, I schedule a call with one of my earliest clients, now enrolled in her dream college. I hear her voice, bright and sure. "I wouldn't be here without you." That's when I remember the truth I learned on that balcony. Betrayal can be a brutal end or a breathtaking beginning. I choose the latter.